Hey everyone, how's it going? So, I just had a nice little drinky poo, so I'm slightly drunk. Just wanted to basically try making a video to see how it actually works when I have actually had a little bit of a drink. So, I guess I'm more relaxed. I'm probably more fluent if I'm honest. I was thinking about talking about human bias, because this is something I've never really heard about, but it's something which is endemic to everything that human beings do. So, human bias, in a nutshell, is the fact that everything is tainted by the fact we're humans and we're not something else. So, we look at the world in terms of in human terms, right? So, we might look at a mountain and say this mountain is a good source of ores, for example, copper, nickel, for example, but human bias goes beyond that because that's kind of cultural bias. So another type of human might look at a mountain and go, this mountain is sacred. This is where my gods live, right? Like it could be Mount Olympus or something, ancient Greece. So there's all these different ways of looking at the world that are completely different. And here's the interesting thing. A lot of people nowadays say the scientific way of viewing the world, the sort of very materialist, sort of reductionist, scientific method is a really good way of looking at the world, perhaps the best way of looking at the world. But you know, there's no evidence of this. There's no evidence, right? Because science is actually very concerned with the material world, right? That is what it's concerned with. Whereas the actual world that human beings inhabit is not a world, it's not a material world. It's a kind of psychosocial world, right? The world that's important to us doesn't actually exist materially, at least as far as we know. So to put this in context, if you think about René Descartes, for example, he said cognito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Okay? Now, this is a bit stupid in a sense, that you could say I laugh and therefore I am. But the point is that the only thing that you can know for sure is that you're thinking, and you can't even know that, right? So that's kind of a basis of science, right? The Renaissance, science is kind of based on this idea that we can't know anything for sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the material world and we're going to start gathering evidence. We're going to gather in loads of evidence, and then we're going to basically base our ideas off this evidence. Right, which is a perfectly reasonable way of looking at the world. Don't get me wrong, but it isn't the definitive way of looking at the world. Okay, there are different people and different cultures and different ideas, and they are all, in a sense, equally valid. And I realise I'm talking about moral relativism, right? This idea that one ideology is better than others. But I still think you can be a bit utilitarian about this. So you can kind of say that if an ideology or a set of ideas produces good results, then maybe it's a good ideology, okay? Simply if you're looking at, well, from a utilitarian perspective, you know, what is useful for me, what is not useful for me. But, you know, the most important thing ultimately isn't any particular one way of looking at the world. It's all of the ways of looking at the world. This is why diversity is a strength. It doesn't matter what your creed is, right? It doesn't actually matter what your physical appearance is or anything like that. What matters is what's in your mind, okay? When we have lots of different ideas about the world, there are different avenues to explore, okay? And we can make big advancements for the species, right? Simply because of our diversity of thought, okay? We've got the scientists over here with a very sort of materialist approach. We might have spiritualists over here have a completely different understanding of the world. Now, scientists, we might say in our modern day and age, might be more useful, or you could argue spiritualists are more useful, because ultimately, when you're talking about human happiness and fulfillment, then science doesn't actually deliver that, right? Science is kind of very cold in a sense. It tells you what is, but not what ought to be, okay? And spiritualism can tell you what ought to be, right? It can... A scientist might say, well, slavery, right, might have benefits to us. But a spiritualist might say, well, look, it doesn't matter if there's benefits to us. It's morally wrong to own slaves, and therefore slavery should be abolished. Okay, purely on materialist terms, it doesn't. What I'm trying to say is, right, science is important. It's a great way of looking at the world, but there's more than just science, right? And what really matters is preserving different ways of thinking in the world, right? And true diversity is diversity of thought, right? What happens between your ears is really what matters in the world. And, it's great if we can all communicate with each other. English is a fantastic language, but there are so many other languages with different concepts and different ideas that are absolutely vital, that, we preserve these schools of thought, right? Because they have completely different ways of viewing the world. One of the big problems with English in particular is it's an unbelievably temporal language, right? We are concerned with what happened in the past, what's happening now, and what's happening in the future, It's unbelievably temporally orientated. Whereas if you focus too much on time and not other aspects, then, well, you just lose so much, Other languages might, for example, French or Spanish, they think that things are male or female, or maybe neutral, okay? But that's a completely different conception of the world, Nowhere in English do we say this table is masculine and this chair is feminine, right? We wouldn't conceptualize the world like that. And if we want to advance in ideas as a species, we need to have as many different ideas as possible. So, one of the great tragedies of modern times is that the number of ideas and creativity that we have has been falling, okay? It's been falling off a cliff. You might think, wow, aren't we advanced? You look at a single person like Thomas Edison. He must have invented 50 different things. In the past 5 years, sure, we've made some breakthroughs. CRISPR looks incredibly interesting. There are some high science breakthroughs which are going to be great. But if you look at the number of new consumer goods or the number of new inventions, there's been virtually none as far as I'm aware. Whereas if you went back to Thomas Edison's day, right, there were so many different inventions that were coming out. If you look at the Soviet Union, they had some pretty ridiculous inventions, like, for example, a gas-powered fridge, right, that worked better when you left the window open. There was a gas-powered radio, for example. With I think it was actually a gas-powered radio. There was a gas-powered radio that would heat your house, and it would actually provide a radio with energy so it could broadcast, but it worked best if the window was open. So that kind of defeats the point, especially in Russia, of actually having a radio. But I guess these are just more comic examples, but nevertheless, innovation is at an all-time low. And I genuinely think, right, if we want to advance as a species, which we do, believe me, we do really, really need to advance as a species, we need to maintain diversity of thought. So when you look at what's happening in politics right now, people who are on the right of politics, and don't get me wrong, the right has an unbelievably bad PR problem, especially in the UK, right? In America, it's not so bad, although it is pretty bad. But if you look at some people who are right-wing, for example, like conservatives and libertarians and, various other schools of thought, people don't even know about this in the UK. They don't even, consider all these different ideas. But, they're important to have, these ideas. And, when you get protesters who are trying to suppress these ideas and the spreading of these ideas, right, they're really only hurting themselves because, the thing is, right, one of the big ideas about the human race is that we are an intelligent thinking species, right? So we will hear ideas, we might agree and we might disagree, but the point is everyone should be free to express these ideas as long as they don't kind of incite any kind of hatred or violence. I absolutely agree with this, okay? Because obviously expressing okay, sorry, I'm using bad terminology here. Let me be very specific. If you speak and you encourage violence, that's a very, very bad thing, and that should be stopped. But if you are simply expressing an opinion in a sort of civilized way, then that's absolutely wonderful and advances the collective knowledge of mankind. And let me tell you why scientific ideas, why all ideas are really important, right? Our species, as far as I'm concerned, will go extinct, okay? If you look at the Neanderthals, right, they were here between 200,000 and 300,000 years, right? And let that sink in. We are so concerned with the last 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus Christ was born, that seems like a completely different world, right? But, you know, the truth is, human beings have had civilization for 12,000 years. So, it's what? 5 times longer than we assume it is, or 6 times longer. So, what I'm basically saying is, if we want to be here for the future, which I assume most people do, because, heck, what's the point of all this civilization if we're going to be gone in 100 years or 200 years? Then we need to start looking at how we can advance our civilization, and in order to do that, we need as many different minds, as many different, you know, ideas as possible. So, environmentalism is a very good example here. I, broadly speaking, agree with a lot of environmental ideas, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to save us, right? And I'm not even concerned with climate change. Climate change is going to be an absolute disaster if the planet gets more than 3 degrees. Well, let's just say, right, if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, life is really, really, really hard. It's really warm. There are mosquitoes that will give you, you know, malaria and horrible diseases. When the planet warms up, it's an absolute nightmare for human beings because you get all kinds of horrible parasites appearing, horrible infectious diseases, right? And there's no way that we can stop this, right? Especially if all our energy has been depleted because we burnt it all. We've dug out all the oil from the ground, we burnt it because, you know, we need to drive around endlessly for millions and millions of miles around the world, right? This is vitally important for some reason to our species, just driving endlessly on holiday and here and there and everywhere. So yeah, we've burnt all our freaking resources, so there's like nothing left. And, you know, we're going to go into this future, and what are we going to do? We're going to say, right, we've got like, what, 6 billion, 7 billion, 8 billion humans, 9 billion humans. It's going to peak at 9 billion humans, right? So we're going to get up to 9 billion humans. All of them have the potential for a horrendous disease to evolve that's going to kill us all. Antibiotics are going to stop working because we're using them to death. We are giving them to all the different animals, right? Like, animals really need antibiotics because humans have decided that animals should live in disgusting, appalling conditions, and the only way they can stop all these animals from dying is by giving them loads of antibiotics, right? This miracle drug that saved millions of lives, right? We are going to throw this down the drain. We're desperately trying to breed superbugs to wipe ourselves out with all this cow farming and pig farming, put these poor little animals in a tiny little box and let them rot away, and the only thing that's preventing them from rotting away is these antibiotics that we're giving them. How about you actually improve animal welfare? Maybe we should stop eating so much meat, but you know what? If the free market was allowed to actually work, then the cost of meat would go up, and then less people would eat it, wouldn't we? You know, we would actually find alternatives. But instead, well, especially the Americans, they're subsidizing the production of corn, right? And then they're subsidizing the corn's being fed to cows. Cows are meant to eat grass, but instead we're feeding them on all this corn. And, you know, we're producing huge amounts of meat, but these animals are living in torture houses, you know? It's absolutely disgusting. I know I'm ranting a lot here, right? But I've, you know, had a bit of vodka, I guess, but seriously, there are so many problems with the world, and, you know, nobody's talking about it. I'm a fan of Sargon of Akkad. I've been watching his videos for about 4 years, right? I have watched the media talk about a 3-year-old tweet probably hundreds of times, thousands of times. There are people in the world who are dying. You know, there are genocides going on. China's got concentration camps, for goodness sake, right? And what are they talking about? They're talking about a 3-year-old tweet, right? From one MEP, okay? This does not represent his view. It is completely irrelevant. It is designed to smear him, and it's designed to maintain the status quo, okay? And I actually think he's a good guy. He really is. Look at his videos if you doubt me. But Jesus Christ, people, you know, we're facing climate change. You know, the world is warming up. We are facing ecological annihilation. You know, we've lost nearly, what, half of all the species, if not more? We've lost some horrendous amount of species in the past few years. I mean, yeah, I know we're doing things as a species to actually try to prevent habitat loss and things, but honestly, I don't know. I'm sorry for the ranting nature of this video, but I'm just kind of pissed off because there's so many things wrong with the world and our priorities are completely messed up. And there's just, honestly, so many problems. I just wanted to thank you for listening, but yeah, please do let me know what you think. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.